In the annals of human history, few organizations have left as chilling a mark as the Gestapo, the secret police of Nazi Germany. From its inception on April 26, 1933, to its dissolution in May 1945, this ruthless apparatus of state terror operated a network of interrogation centers and torture chambers that spread fear across Europe. These sinister spaces, designed to break the human spirit, stood as testament to the depths of cruelty that humanity can descend to in pursuit of power and control. As Hannah Arendt, the political theorist who coined the phrase "the banality of evil," observed, "The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil." At the heart of this web of terror stood the Gestapo headquarters in Berlin, located at Prinz Albrecht Straße 8, now Niederkirchner Straße. This imposing building, with its stark neoclassical facade, housed some of the most feared interrogation rooms in the Third Reich. Behind its austere walls, countless victims faced unspeakable horrors. The building's very architecture was designed to instill a sense of hopelessness in those unfortunate enough to cross its threshold. Today, the site houses the Topography of Terror Museum, a chilling reminder of the atrocities committed there. One prisoner, Rudolf Diels, who miraculously survived his ordeal and later became the first chief of the Gestapo, described the interior as a labyrinth of pain. The corridors were intentionally designed to be confusing, with sudden turns and dead ends that left prisoners disoriented. The cells were small, often no larger than a closet, with bare concrete walls that seemed to close in on the occupants. In some areas, the screams of other prisoners were deliberately allowed to echo through the halls, a psychological tactic meant to wear down the resolve of those awaiting interrogation. This tactic was particularly effective during the Nacht und Nebel, Night and Fog Decree of December 7, 1941, which allowed for the secret arrest and disappearance of resistance fighters. Perhaps even more infamous was the Hausgefängnis, or house prison, located in the cellar of the same building. This underground chamber of horrors was where the Gestapo conducted some of its most brutal interrogations. The rooms here were specially soundproofed to muffle the screams of the tortured. One survivor, Hans Gluck, later recounted, "The silence was almost as terrifying as the pain. It made you feel as if you had been erased from the world." It was in these rooms that high-profile prisoners like Georg Elser, who attempted to assassinate Hitler on November 8, 1939, were subjected to relentless questioning and torture. The layout of the Hausgefängnis was meticulously planned to maximize the psychological impact on prisoners. Cells were deliberately kept cold and damp. Lighting was harsh and irregular, making it impossible for prisoners to track the passage of time. In some rooms, the floor was slightly sloped, forcing prisoners to constantly adjust their footing, a subtle but effective form of physical and mental exhaustion. This design was replicated in other Gestapo facilities across occupied Europe, creating a standardized system of torment. But the reach of the Gestapo extended far beyond Berlin. In occupied countries, they established torture centers that became synonymous with terror. One of the most notorious was Fort Breendonk in Belgium. Originally built as a defensive fortification in 1906, it was transformed by the Nazis into a transit camp and interrogation center on September 20, 1940, that would haunt the nightmares of Belgians for generations. Over 3,500 prisoners passed through its gates, with only about half surviving the war. Fort Breendonk's thick stone walls and deep moat, once meant to keep invaders out, now served to keep prisoners in and muffle their cries. The fort's layout was exploited to create a hellish environment. Prisoners were held in damp, dark casemates, originally designed to house artillery. These spaces, never meant for human habitation, became overcrowded cells where prisoners struggled to breathe in the stagnant air. One of the most feared torturers at Breendonk was Fernand Weiss, known as the Butcher of Breendonk, whose cruelty became legendary among prisoners. One of the most feared areas in Fort Breendonk was the torture chamber, chillingly referred to as the bunker. This room, with its bare concrete walls and drain in the center of the floor, was where countless prisoners faced unimaginable suffering. Jean Amery, a resistance fighter who survived Breendonk, later wrote, "Whoever was led to this room left it as a broken human being." Amery's haunting memoir, At the Mind's Limits, provides one of the most vivid accounts of the psychological impact of torture. The psychological impact of these spaces cannot be overstated. Every aspect of their design was calculated to break the spirit of those held within. In many Gestapo facilities, including the Paris headquarters at 84 Avenue Foch, cells were deliberately made too small to lie down in. Prisoners were forced to stand or crouch for hours or days on end, a form of torture in itself. This building, once a luxurious mansion, became known as La Maison de la Gestapo, and was where many members of the French resistance, including Jean Moulin, were brutally interrogated. In some locations, such as the Gestapo prison in Fuhlsbüttel, Hamburg, known ominously as Kolafu, cells were painted with disorienting patterns or fitted with sloping floors. These seemingly minor alterations could drive prisoners to the brink of madness over time. One survivor described the experience as like being trapped in a funhouse mirror, except the distortions were in your mind. The prison, established in 1933, held over 200,000 inmates during its operation and became notorious for its special treatment of political prisoners. The Gestapo's torture chambers were not just physical spaces, but psychological weapons. In Warsaw, at the Gestapo headquarters in Zucha Avenue, interrogators would sometimes leave prisoners alone in a room with a loaded pistol on the table, a cruel mind game designed to provoke thoughts of self-harm. This building, which now houses the Mausoleum of Struggle and Martyrdom, was where many members of the Polish underground were tortured and executed during the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. The Gestapo's network of terror extended to countless other locations across Europe. In Prague, the Petchek Palace became the headquarters of the Gestapo in 1939. Its basement cells, known as the Petchek Hell, were notorious for their brutality. In Amsterdam, the Gestapo took over a school building on Uterpestraat, transforming classrooms into interrogation rooms. The juxtaposition of a place once filled with children's laughter becoming a center of terror was a stark symbol of the Nazi occupation. Perhaps one of the most insidious aspects of the Gestapo's torture chambers was their often unassuming exteriors. Many were housed in ordinary buildings, hotels, office blocks, or residential homes that gave no outward sign of the horrors within. This normality made their existence all the more terrifying, as no one could be sure where the next torture center might be. As Victor Klemperer, a German Jew who survived the Nazi regime, noted in his diaries, the most powerful party in the state had made terror and lies part of the normal routine of life. The methods employed in these chambers were as varied as they were cruel. In addition to physical torture, psychological manipulation was a key tool. Sleep deprivation, sensory disorientation, and mock executions were common tactics. At the Gestapo headquarters in Vienna, located in the Hotel Metropole, prisoners were sometimes forced to stand for days in water-filled cells, a technique that caused excruciating pain and often led to hallucinations. The architects of agony, inside the Gestapo's arsenal of terror. In the shadowy realm of Nazi Germany's secret police, the Gestapo wielded an arsenal of torture methods designed not just to extract information, but to shatter the very essence of human dignity and resistance. From its inception on April 26, 1933, until its dissolution in May 1945, these techniques of torment were refined and deployed with chilling efficiency, leaving an indelible scar on the psyche of occupied Europe. As George Orwell presciently wrote in his dystopian novel 1984, "If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever." This grim vision was all too real for those who fell into the Gestapo's grasp. The physical brutality employed by the Gestapo was as varied as it was vicious. Beatings were commonplace, often administered with rubber truncheons that could inflict severe internal injuries without leaving visible marks. At the infamous Prince Albrechtstrasse headquarters in Berlin, prisoners like Hans Littner recalled the sickening rhythm of blows, punctuated by the screams of the tortured echoing through the corridors. Littner, arrested on June 22, 1944, for his involvement in the resistance, later wrote, "The pain was indescribable, but worse was the knowledge that it could and would go on indefinitely." But the Gestapo's cruelty extended far beyond mere physical assault. Electric shock torture became a favored technique, with devices specially designed to inflict maximum pain without causing death. In the Paris headquarters at 84 Avenue Foch, resistance fighter Jacques Delarue described the agony. "It felt as if my whole body was being torn apart from the inside." The voltage was often applied to the most sensitive areas of the body, intensifying both the physical pain and the feeling of intrusion and humiliation. This building, once a luxurious mansion, became known as La Maison de la Gestapo after its requisition on October 20, 1940. Here, the infamous Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, honed his brutal interrogation techniques before being transferred to Lyon in November 1942. Waterboarding, a technique that simulates drowning, was another weapon in the Gestapo's arsenal. At Fort Breendonk in Belgium, survivors like Jean Amery recounted the terror of this ordeal. "Each second, you die and are reborn, dying and being reborn again and again," Amery wrote, capturing the existential horror of the experience. This method was particularly effective in breaking prisoners quickly, as the fear of imminent death was overwhelming. Yet as brutal as these physical tortures were, it was perhaps the Gestapo's mastery of psychological torment that proved most insidious. Sleep deprivation was a cornerstone of their approach, with prisoners in facilities like the Cola Fu prison in Hamburg being kept awake for days on end. The resulting disorientation and hallucinations made victims more susceptible to manipulation and more likely to break under interrogation. One survivor, Willy Bredel, who was imprisoned there from March to November 1933, described the experience as a waking nightmare that blurred the lines between reality and madness. Threats to family members were another cruel tactic employed by the Gestapo. In the Warsaw headquarters on Schucher Avenue, interrogators would often bring in children's clothing or toys, implying that they had captured the prisoner's family. This psychological warfare played on the deepest fears of the victims, often proving more effective than physical pain in eliciting cooperation. As resistance member Kazimierz Moczarski recounted, "The threat to my wife broke me in ways that no physical pain could." Mock executions were perhaps one of the most traumatizing methods used. At the Gestapo center in Prague's Peček Palace, prisoners would be lined up against a wall, blindfolded, and subjected to the terrifying sounds of guns being cocked and fired. The resulting trauma often left victims in a state of constant fear, never knowing if the next mock execution might be real. The Peček Palace, a grand neo-Baroque building, was commandeered by the Gestapo on March 15, 1939, the day Nazi Germany occupied Czechoslovakia. Its basement cells became known as the Peček Hell, as Czech resistance fighter Milada Horokova, who was eventually executed on June 27, 1950, after a show trial by the subsequent communist regime, said of her time there, "Each day felt like my last, yet death never came." The cumulative effect of these torture methods on individuals was devastating. Many survivors, like Primo Levi, spoke of a profound sense of shame and guilt that lingered long after their physical wounds had healed. "We who survived the camps are not true witnesses," Levi wrote, highlighting the way torture could destroy not just the body, but the very sense of self. Levi, who survived Auschwitz and wrote extensively about his experiences, tragically took his own life on April 11, 1987, a testament to the enduring trauma of his ordeal. But the impact of the Gestapo's methods extended far beyond their immediate victims. The ever-present threat of torture served as a powerful tool of control over the broader population. In occupied France, The mere sight of the green Citroën traction Avant cars used by the Gestapo was enough to send people scurrying for cover. These vehicles, nicknamed Les Tractions by the French, became symbols of terror. As resistance member Lucy Aubrac noted in her memoirs, the sound of those engines was enough to empty a street in seconds. This atmosphere of terror was deliberately cultivated. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the SS and Gestapo, famously declared in a speech to SS leaders in Posen on October 4, 1943, "The best political weapon is the weapon of terror. Cruelty commands respect. Men may hate us, but we don't ask for their love, only for their fear." This philosophy underpinned the Gestapo's approach, turning torture from a mere interrogation technique into a tool of societal control. The psychological manipulation employed by the Gestapo was not limited to the torture chamber. They expertly exploited human vulnerabilities and social dynamics to turn neighbor against neighbor. The constant threat of denunciation meant that no one could be trusted, fracturing communities and isolating potential resistors. As one survivor from Vienna noted, the walls had ears, and every casual remark could lead to the cellar of the Hotel Metropole, referring to the Gestapo's notorious headquarters in the city. The Hotel Metropole, a once luxurious establishment on the Morsinplatz, was seized by the Gestapo on March 12, 1938, the day of the Anschluss. It became known as the House of Horrors among Viennese citizens. Perhaps one of the most insidious aspects of the Gestapo's psychological warfare was its unpredictability. While some prisoners were subjected to immediate and intense torture, others were left to stew in uncertainty for days or weeks. This inconsistency was deliberate, designed to keep victims off balance and unable to prepare mentally for what might come next. At the Prince Albrechtstrasse facility, prisoner Rudolf Diels, who ironically later became the first chief of the Gestapo before falling out of favor, described this tactic. "The waiting was often worse than the interrogation. Your mind became your own torturer." The long-term consequences of these torture methods on both individuals and society were profound. Many survivors struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, and an inability to form close relationships long after the war had ended. Jean Amery, who survived torture at Fort Brindonk, wrote in his 1966 essay, "Torture. Anyone who has been tortured remains tortured. Faith in humanity, already cracked by the first slap in the face, then demolished by torture, is never acquired again." Amery's inability to overcome his trauma led to his tragic decision to end his life on October 17, 1978. On a broader scale, the breakdown of trust and the normalization of cruelty left deep scars on the societies that had lived under Nazi occupation. In France, the period following liberation saw a wave of retributive violence against suspected collaborators, a phenomenon known as the épuration sauvage, or wild purge. This vigilante justice, while understandable in the context of years of occupation and terror, further fractured communities and complicated the process of post-war healing. Echoes of Defiance, voices from the Gestapo's shadow. From its inception on April 26, 1933, to its dissolution in May 1945, this ruthless secret police force cast a long shadow across Europe, leaving in its wake countless broken bodies and shattered spirits. Yet, amidst the horror, stories of incredible resilience and unwavering courage emerged, tales of ordinary people who, in the face of unimaginable cruelty, found the strength to resist, to endure, and ultimately to bear witness. As Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate, once said, "For the dead and the living, we must bear witness." One such voice belongs to Sophie Scholl, a 21-year-old student at the University of Munich. As a core member of the White Rose Resistance Group, Sophie, along with her brother Hans and their friends, dared to distribute anti-Nazi leaflets across the university campus. On February 18, 1943, their act of defiance came to an abrupt end when they were arrested by the Gestapo. In the days that followed, Sophie faced relentless interrogation at the hands of Robert Moore, a seasoned Gestapo investigator. Despite the pressure, she remained resolute. In her final statement before her execution on February 22, 1943, Sophie declared, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause?" Her words continue to resonate as a testament to the power of individual conscience in the face of tyranny. The Scholl siblings, along with their friend Christoph Probst, were beheaded at Stadelheim prison in Munich, their young lives cut short, but their legacy enduring. The Gestapo's reach extended far beyond Germany's borders. In occupied France, Jean Moulin became a symbol of the French resistance. Appointed by Charles de Gaulle to unify the various resistance factions, Moulin operated under the alias Max. His luck ran out on June 21, 1943, when he was arrested by the Gestapo in Caluire, a suburb of Lyon. Subjected to brutal torture at the hands of Klaus Barbie, the infamous Butcher of Lyon, Moulin never broke. He died on July 8, 1943, having revealed nothing to his captors. Years later, André Malraux would immortalize Moulin's sacrifice in a speech at the Pantheon, saying, "Today, youth of France, may you think of that man as you would have reached out your hands to his poor, unrecognizable face on that last day, to those lips that never let fall a word of betrayal." Moulin's story is intertwined with that of Lucie Aubrac, another resistance fighter who, in a daring operation on October 21, 1943, helped rescue her husband Raymond from Gestapo custody. Lucie later wrote, "Resistance is a state of mind as much as it is an act. Not all who suffered under the Gestapo were resistance fighters or political dissidents. Ordinary citizens often found themselves caught in the crosshairs of Nazi paranoia. Władysław Szpilman, a Polish Jewish pianist whose story would later inspire the film The Pianist, survived the Warsaw Ghetto and spent years in hiding. In his memoir, he recounts a chilling encounter with a Gestapo officer who discovered his hiding place in November 1944. Expecting certain death, Szpilman was shocked when the officer, upon learning he was a pianist, asked him to play. "I played Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor," Szpilman wrote. "When I finished, the silence seemed even gloomier than before. I thought, now he will shoot me." Instead, the officer, later identified as Wilm Hosenfeld, helped him find a better hiding place and even brought him food. This rare moment of humanity, amidst overwhelming brutality, underscores the complex reality of life under Nazi occupation. Hosenfeld's diary, discovered after the war, revealed his deep disgust with Nazi atrocities, writing on August 13, 1943, "We have no right to speak of a Christian West until these wrongdoings have been atoned for." The Gestapo's tactics often extended beyond physical torture to psychological manipulation. Odette Sansom, a British spy operating in France, was arrested on April 16, 1943, and sent to Fresnes prison. There she endured months of interrogation and torture, including having her toenails pulled out and being subjected to a mock execution. Despite this, she maintained her cover story, even convincing her captors that she was related to Winston Churchill. In her post-war testimony, Sansom reflected on the psychological toll. "The questions never stopped, day and night. It wasn't the physical pain that was the worst. It was the mental strain of staying alert, of not contradicting yourself, of not giving away a single scrap of information." Sansom's resilience was remarkable. She survived not only Fresnes, but also the horrors of Ravensbrück concentration camp. After the war, she was awarded the George Cross, becoming the first woman to receive the honor while alive. Her story intertwines with that of Violette Szabo, another SOE agent who was captured on June 10, 1944, near Limoges. Szabo endured horrific torture at 84 Avenue Foch, the Gestapo headquarters in Paris, before being sent to Ravensbrück, where she was executed on February 5, 1945, at the age of 23. For many, survival came at a terrible cost. Primo Levi, an Italian Jewish chemist who survived Auschwitz, grappled with the guilt of having lived when so many others perished. In his haunting memoir, If This Is a Man, he wrote, "We who survived the camps are not true witnesses. We, the survivors, are not only an exiguous, but also an anomalous minority. We are those who by their prevarications or abilities or good luck did not touch bottom. Those who did so, those who saw the Gorgon, have not returned to tell about it or have returned mute. Levy's words speak to the profound psychological impact of surviving such extreme trauma, a burden that he carried until his death in 1987. His experiences were echoed by many others, including Elie Wiesel, who survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Wiesel, in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech on December 10, 1986, said, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." The stories of the Gestapo's victims are not confined to the war years. Many survivors spent decades coming to terms with their experiences. Germaine Tillion, a French ethnologist and resistance member who survived Ravensbrück concentration camp, devoted her post-war life to documenting Nazi crimes and advocating for human rights. In her 1988 book, Ravensbrück, she wrote, "To understand is not to forgive. It is only by understanding that we can prevent such things from happening again." Tillion's words underscore the importance of bearing witness, of ensuring that the voices of those who suffered are not lost to history. Her commitment to truth and justice was shared by Simon Wiesenthal, who survived multiple concentration camps and dedicated his life to hunting Nazi war criminals. Wiesenthal famously said, "For evil to flourish, it only requires good men to do nothing." His work led to the capture of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina on May 11, 1960, bringing one of the architects of the Holocaust to justice. Perhaps one of the most poignant testimonies comes from Anne Frank, whose diary has become a symbol of the Holocaust's human cost. Though Anne did not survive, she died in Bergen-Belsen in February 1945. Her words live on, a stark reminder of the dreams and hopes shattered by Nazi brutality. In an entry dated April 11, 1944, just months before her arrest by the Gestapo on August 4, 1944, she wrote, "I keep my ideals, because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." The tragic irony of her optimism in the face of impending doom serves as a powerful indictment of the regime that would soon claim her life. Anne's story is intertwined with that of Miep Gies, one of the Dutch citizens who helped hide the Frank family. After the arrest, Gies saved Anne's diary, later saying, "I am not a hero. I stand at the end of the long, long line of good Dutch people who did what I did and more, much more, during those dark and terrible times years ago, but always like yesterday in the heart of those of us who bear witness." Echoes of Terror, the haunting legacy of Gestapo dungeons. As the dust settled on the ruins of Nazi Germany in May 1945, a grim task lay ahead for the Allied forces and the liberated nations of Europe. The notorious torture chambers of the Gestapo, once hidden behind a veil of secrecy and fear, now stood exposed, silent witnesses to unspeakable horrors. These sites of brutality, scattered across the continent from Paris to Warsaw, from Oslo to Athens, would become focal points for justice, remembrance, and the painful process of coming to terms with the darkest chapter of 20th century history. As Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel once said, "For the victim, time doesn't heal all wounds. There are those that remain painfully open." In the immediate aftermath of the war, many Gestapo headquarters and prisons were hastily abandoned, their secrets left to be uncovered by Allied investigators and traumatized survivors. The infamous Gestapo headquarters at 84 Avenue Foch in Paris, where countless members of the French resistance had been tortured, was one of the first to be liberated. As Allied troops entered the building on August 25, 1944, they were confronted with a chilling scene. Resistance fighter Jacques Delarue, who participated in the liberation, later wrote, "The stench of blood and fear still hung in the air. On the walls, we could see fingernail marks where prisoners had clawed in desperation." Among the liberators, was a young American soldier named Henry Kissinger, who would later become US Secretary of State. In his memoirs, Kissinger recalled, "The implements of torture were still there, some with traces of blood on them. It was a house of horrors that would haunt me for years to come." Some of these sites were quickly transformed into memorials and museums, preserving the physical evidence of Nazi atrocities for future generations. The Gestapo headquarters in Cologne, known as Elde House, is one such example. Opened as a museum in 1981, it stands as a stark reminder of the regime's brutality. The basement cells, where an estimated 1,800 prisoners were executed, still bear the haunting inscriptions left by those who suffered there. One poignant message reads, "Here in the Gestapo bunker, hell on earth. God deliver us." Another, dated July 24, 1944, simply states, "I am innocent. Long live France." The museum's director, Werner Jung, has said, "These walls speak louder than any history book. They are a testament to human suffering and resilience." In Berlin, the former Gestapo headquarters at Prinz Albrecht Straße 8 was partially destroyed during the war. The site lay in ruins for decades, a contentious space in the divided city. It wasn't until 1987 that the first temporary exhibition, Topography of Terror, was installed on the grounds. Today, it serves as a powerful documentation center, attracting over 1 million visitors annually who come to confront Germany's dark past. The site includes remnants of the Gestapo's house prison, where high-profile prisoners like Georg Elser, who nearly assassinated Hitler in 1939, were held and tortured. As historian Karen Till notes, the Topography of Terror forces visitors to confront not just the past, but also their own capacity for complicity in the face of evil. As these physical spaces were being preserved and transformed, a legal and moral reckoning was underway. The Nuremberg trials, which began on November 20, 1945, brought high-ranking Nazi officials to account for their crimes. While the Gestapo as an organization was declared a criminal entity, many of its individual members managed to evade justice in the immediate post-war period. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the highest-ranking SS leader to be tried at Nuremberg, and former chief of the Reich Main Security Office, which oversaw the Gestapo, was one of the few top Gestapo officials to face justice. He was executed on October 16, 1946. During his trial, Kaltenbrunner claimed ignorance of the atrocities committed under his command, a defense that Chief Prosecutor Robert H. Jackson famously dismissed, saying, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated." The hunt for Gestapo officers and their collaborators continued for decades. One of the most notorious cases was that of Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, who was responsible for the torture and death of thousands in occupied France. Barbie managed to escape to Bolivia with the help of US intelligence services, but was finally extradited to France in 1983. His trial in 1987 forced France to confront its wartime past, including the uncomfortable truths of collaboration. Barbie, unrepentant to the end, was convicted of crimes against humanity and died in prison in 1991. During his trial, resistance fighter Lisa Lesevre testified about her torture at Barbie's hands, including being suspended by her wrists for hours. She told the court, "I felt I was dying, but I was determined not to speak. It was a battle between him and me." This guilt, coupled with the trauma of their experiences, led many survivors to silence. It wasn't until decades later that many felt able to share their stories. Simone Weil, a survivor of Auschwitz who went on to become the first female president of the European Parliament, spoke of this delayed testimony. "For 40 years I fought against my memory. It's only recently that I've allowed myself to bear witness." Weil's journey from concentration camp survivor to one of Europe's most respected politicians is a testament to human resilience. In her memoir, she wrote, "Nothing is more contagious than example. We must never let the memory of these events fade. The collective memory of nations affected by Nazi occupation has been profoundly shaped by the legacy of Gestapo terror. In Norway, the Gestapo headquarters at Victoria Terrasse in Oslo became synonymous with torture and fear. After the war, it was quickly repurposed for government use, a decision that some criticized as an attempt to brush over the past. It wasn't until 2015 that a memorial plaque was finally installed, acknowledging the building's dark history. The plaque bears the words of Norwegian poet Nordahl Grieg, "We are so few in this country, every fallen is a brother and friend." This delayed recognition reflects the complex process of coming to terms with a painful past, a process that Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel described as not easy but necessary. In Eastern Europe, where the shadow of Soviet oppression followed closely on the heels of Nazi occupation, confronting the legacy of the Gestapo has been a complex process. The House of Terror in Budapest, opened in 2002, attempts to address this dual legacy, housing exhibits on both Nazi and communist secret police activities. This approach has not been without controversy, with some critics arguing that it equates Nazi crimes with those of the communist regime. The museum's director, Maria Schmidt, has defended this approach, stating, "We must confront all forms of totalitarianism if we are to truly understand our past." The museum includes reconstructions of both Gestapo and AVH, Hungarian state security, interrogation rooms, providing a chilling comparison of the methods used by both regimes. The impact of Gestapo torture extends beyond the immediate victims to entire communities. In the Netherlands, the Gestapo headquarters at Uterpestraat in Amsterdam, now renamed Gerrit van der Veenstraat, was a site of particular horror. After the war, local residents reported experiencing nightmares and anxiety attacks simply from walking past the building. In 1967, a memorial was placed at the site, bearing the words of Dutch poet Ida Gerhardt, "Commemorate the nameless with a name." The building itself was later converted into apartments, a decision that sparked debate about how best to preserve the memory of such sites. As Dutch historian Hans Blum noted, "The challenge is to find a balance between remembrance and moving forward." As time passes and the last survivors of the Nazi era leave us, the challenge of preserving the memory of Gestapo atrocities becomes ever more pressing. Initiatives like the USC Shoah Foundation, which has recorded over 55,000 video testimonies from Holocaust survivors, aim to ensure that these stories are not lost to time. Steven Spielberg, who founded the organization after directing Schindler's List, has said, "The survivors are the most articulate and effective teachers of what intolerance can lead to." The Foundation's work has extended beyond the Holocaust to include testimonies from other genocides, reflecting a commitment to the idea that understanding past atrocities is crucial to preventing future ones. At the same time, rising far-right movements in Europe and beyond have led to renewed calls for vigilance against the kind of ideology that enabled the Gestapo's reign of terror. In Germany, the Alternative for Germany, AfD party, has gained significant support, prompting concerns about a resurgence of nationalist sentiment. Charlotte Knobloch, president of the Jewish community of Munich and Upper Bavaria, has warned, "We must not forget that democracy is fragile. The Gestapo didn't appear overnight. It was the result of a gradual erosion of democratic norms." As we close this chapter of history, the echoes of suffering still resonate within the walls of Gestapo torture chambers. From 1933 to 1945, these dark corners of Nazi Germany bore witness to unspeakable cruelty. As we reflect on this grim period, let us remember the chilling words of Hermann Göring, founder of the Gestapo. "The people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same way in any country." This stark reminder of how easily fear can be weaponized serves as a warning for future generations. May we remain vigilant lest history's darkest chapters find new authors. In remembering, we honor those who endured and those who perished. Their stories, etched in time, serve as a solemn reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human resilience.